The Democrats' faith outreach in 2010 hasn't been anything like it was in 2008. And that's doubly bad news because the incumbent, the president in this case, and his party are always going to lose seats in the midterm elections. So they really needed to ramp up their faith outreach, especially in such a difficult time, and they haven't done that. The comparison between 2010 and 2008 is really striking. I think the Obama administration and the Democrats really took for granted those faith groups that came out for them in 2008 and haven't cultivated them in the same way that certainly their opponents have. President Obama is his own faith-based spokesman. He talks about Jesus and his personal faith even more than George W. Bush did. Of course, he has to, given that so many people in the country still have real suspicions about his faith and his bona fides, and a growing number of Americans, as polls show, actually think he's a Muslim, which he's not. He hasn't gone to church. He and his family haven't joined a church in Washington. Neither did George W. Bush or Ronald Reagan, for that matter, but they didn't have to. Everybody knew who they were. They were Christians, and they were like middle America, as everyone saw. Barack Obama had to show that he is a Christian, that he is the faith-based president that he says he is in all of his speeches. But he hasn't really done that. He hasn't been visibly out there the way so many other, he really hasn't made that connection with the public in terms of his faith-based approach, which is there, and his policies. That connection has not been made in the public's mind, and he's taken it for granted, and they haven't been out there on the hustings really trying to make that connection and trying to convince voters that they are a faith-friendly party, as they've been saying for years now. There was a lot of talk early on in this campaign about this division within the Republican Party and within the conservative base between social conservatives, those who are concerned with gay marriage and abortion and the like, and economic conservatives, those who said, look, we don't care about those issues, those are just going to lose votes for us. All we care about are spending and tax cuts and deficit reduction and that kind of thing. But the Republicans and the conservative movement and the Tea Party movement have been able to fuse those two streams into one coherent whole. The Democrats have not been able to do anything like that on the left. The vast majority of theologians and church historians would say the gospel's social justice message is integral to what Jesus Christ preached. But here you've got folks on the right, religious right leaders, saying that social justice teachings are not at all part of traditional Christianity. And folks on the religious left are saying, wait a minute, that's crazy. And the Democratic Party and the Obama administration are not making hay out of that. They're saying, look, you've got a great message that's based in the Bible that should resonate with American Christians, especially at a time like this, and you're not using it. It is a much more complicated task for the Democrats to try and rally religious voters. They have a much more fragmented base, a much more secular base. There's no doubt about it. One of the largest blocs for the Democratic Party are those who profess no religious affiliation, or those who are periodic churchgoers. These just aren't the kind of people who are going to be hearing the message that Democrats want them to hear every Sunday morning when they go to church. President Obama has specifically reached out to and mentioned atheists and non-believers in many of his messages. But again, these aren't the kind of groups that you're naturally going to rally to the polls the way you can rally evangelicals, church-going Catholics, and the like. You've also got the issue, again, of being an administration that's been in power for 2 years. You've got a record to run on. I think that's most evident in the fall-off in Jewish support for President Obama. 78%, almost 80% of Jewish voters backed Obama in the 2008 election, but his approval rating is down to about 50% among those same voters. That's a reliably Democratic bloc that has really fallen off. African American voters as well really need to come out to the polls, but so far the administration hasn't been able to rally them. They're hoping to do so at the very last minute. every administration finds it incredibly difficult to deal with the Palestinian-Israeli problem. And that's been true for the Obama administration too. And there are many who see certainly Obama's outreach to the Muslim world so early on and so assiduously in his tenure as somehow downplaying his commitment to Israel. So there are a number of things going on here, diplomatic difficulties that he's faced, that have also rebounded against him in terms of support from the American Jewish community. There is no longer any Catholic vote. Catholics essentially mirror the electorate at large. They kind of tend to go back and forth from Republican to Democrat to Republican again. And it certainly seems this year that they're going to be shifting their support to Republican candidates by all the polls. There is, however, an interesting shift in that, and split, in that white Catholics, white European Catholics, are much more inclined to favor Republicans than are Latino Catholics, who are the growing demographic among the Catholic community in the United States. So you've got this Latino white European split within the Catholic community, with Latinos tending to go much more heavily towards the Democratic Party. But they're not going to vote in the same numbers that white Catholics are going to vote in. And again, the Obama administration did not deliver on immigration reform as they promised. That was a great disappointment to Latinos, most of whom are Catholic, but also to socially progressive believers who were really pushing the administration to do something on comprehensive immigration reform. I think it's setting up a real religious rematch between those on the religious left and those on the religious right, something more like we saw in 2008. I think the religious right is going to be energized, re-energized, even resuscitated by the election in November, if the Republicans come in with the force that's expected. And I think that's going to be a wake-up call for the Democratic Party, for the Obama administration, and for believers on the liberal side of the spectrum, the so-called religious left. They realize that they can't be taken for granted, and they can't take the advances that they were promised for granted. They are going to have to organize and get ready for 2012. The religious right has promised it's going to be ready for a big battle in 2012 over the presidential race, and the religious left is going to have to respond in kind, or it may not be part of the future conversation of American politics.